introduction of X-Men, along with the positive box office numbers, was a turning point for Marvel and the film industry. A genre of film now making money finally looked very different in the eyes of Hollywood. Could it be that these films about superheroes would finally rise up from the B-film dreck and be treated like serious pieces of film? The new millennium was seeing a major turning point from a filmmaking perspective thanks to the advances in CGI and now the coming possibilities of shooting entire films with digital cameras. It was the end of 2001 where the use of CGI to create entirely digital characters was taken to new heights thanks to the start of two book-based film franchises. The newest sensation that sparked a love for reading once again in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and the classic J.R.R. Tolkien novel The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. The two films were praised at the 2002 Oscar ceremonies, with both films garnering numerous award nominations. Along with a new Star Wars film on the horizon in 2002 saw Marvel's opportunity to use all this technology for their own films. With a second X-Men film in development, another fan favorite was about to make his big screen debut. Everyone's friendly neighborhood Spider-Man was all the hype and entertainment. Hearing about the casting of Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, to the fact that Spider-Man would be entirely digital during action sequences, gave the movie-going public a lot of hope and skepticism. More skepticism would follow due to the first teaser trailer of the film being immediately pulled due to the tragedy of the September 11 terrorist attacks, as the teaser featured the Twin Towers playing a pivotal role. The film was going through some major reshoots as the towers were featured frequently and the wounds were still very fresh. Marvel would, however, bring a familiar face back to the big screen with Blade 2. Wesley Snipes would don the persona of the day-walking vampire under a new director. A fresh face in American cinema who was quickly becoming one of the most praised. Guillermo del Toro brought a deeper and mystical element to the sequel, making the villains more like monsters and less like supervillains. It also had Blade teaming up with the very foes he hunted, and one of the characters played by Ron Perlman would be a prime moment for Del Toro, as Blade 2 gave him the opportunity to ask Mr. Perlman to star in another cult favorite comic book character film, 2004's Hellboy. Blade 2 would feature new CGI digital imagery during action sequences, and while characters would go from flesh and blood to pixels, many would find the characters to look just as real. Blade 2 would receive a warm reception by critics, and while being released during a slow period in film releases, Blade 2 would be the most successful in the series, making $80 million in the United States and $150 million worldwide. Finally, May 2002 would see the release of Spider-Man. It would be the end of a long journey for the web-slinger, as plans for the film had been in Hollywood's hands for 25 years. The film had been shopped around through many production companies and movie studios until it would land at Sony Pictures. Names like James Cameron, Ang Lee, Chris Columbus, and even David Fincher were tapped to direct this film before Sam Raimi would officially get the go-ahead. Raimi was already known for films like the cult horror classic Evil Dead. To get a chance to make a film that had the potential to be widely received was a breath of fresh air for him. The film would feature many relatable levels of storytelling, including introducing Spider-Man's beginnings to the mainstream audience, a love story featuring the girl next door in Mary Jane, and deciding what was important when it came to balancing your responsibilities. Spider-Man became the first film to surpass $100 million in a single weekend, establishing a new opening weekend record. The film would also set a record for crossing the $100 million milestone in 3 days. While the film would see immediate competition from Star Wars Episode II: Attack of the Clones, Spidey would remain in the top 5 films in May. Even the critics praised the film, calling it exciting, filled with tons of heart. Marvel was more than pleased with the outcome, and with their biggest competitors staying away from film thanks to all of their successes of the small screen at the time, Marvel felt that there was much room for expansion, so why not give the fans some more? Marvel was poised to have their most successful year at the box office in 2003. Thanks to one of the smashing successes in Spider-Man, Marvel wanted to keep their fans occupied while they waited. February 2003 would see a cult favorite in the Marvel Universe hit the big screen in Daredevil. Daredevil, while not as popular as characters like Spider-Man, was a very unique one because, thanks to his disability in blindness, it would enhance his radar-like superpower thanks to his 4 other heightened senses. People also appreciated his alter ego, Matt Murdock, who was a down-to-earth humanitarian trying to be just as powerful as a lawyer in New York's Hell's Kitchen, sticking up for the little guy. As Daredevil, he would not be invincible. He would also have an interesting rogues gallery, including the crime boss Kingpin, the assassin Bullseye, and the anti-hero Immortal and former lover Elektra, with a cast including Ben Affleck, Michael Clarke Duncan, and rising stars of the time, including Jennifer Garner and Colin Farrell. Daredevil would unfortunately not get the outcome many had hoped for. Some blamed the poor script. Others blamed the acting choices, as many at the time were not the biggest fans of Ben Affleck. Others were not happy with the fact that Kingpin was portrayed by a black actor, while the character in the comics was white. Still, some critics did find the film enjoyable, and in 2004, a rated R director's cut of the film would breathe new life into Daredevil, with a side story about Matt Murdock taking on a complex case on a character who was played by famed hip-hop star Coolio. The damage unfortunately was done, and Daredevil left many with a sour taste in their mouths. The film did the most damage to Ben Affleck, who to this day felt that taking on the role was a pivotal blow to his career, amongst other things that he had done. It would be a great deal of time for him to finally find his redemption as the Hollywood star, and over a decade to find favor in the eyes of comic book film fans. Marvel obviously had a mess on their hands, but it would only be a small setback, as they had high hopes for the summer as a group of famous heroes would return for a highly anticipated sequel, as well as a newcomer. May 2003 would finally see the return of director Bryan Singer and the X-Men, with the release of X2 X-Men United. Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, Halle Berry, and Ian McKellen would reprise their roles as heroes and villains in the X-Men universe. The fans would also get treated to some new faces, some that fans welcomed with open arms. Aaron Stratford as the fire-controlling Pyro, and Alan Cumming as everyone's favorite blue teleporter, Nightcrawler. The film would also star Brian Cox as the main antagonist of the film, William Stryker, a soldier whose son was a mutant and trained by Professor X, but in the end became a weapon for his father to hunt down and kill all mutant kind. The film would go deeper into the characters, showing their family life, relationships, and overall feelings towards their powers. The film would also include a fantastic cliffhanger ending, preparing the fans for a beloved story from the X-Men comic line to be featured in the next film. X2 received widespread critical acclaim, praise aimed at the acting, action, and story. The critics called the film tightly scripted, solidly acted, and impressively ambitious, and a benchmark for comic sequels in general. The Political Film Society honored X2 in the categories of human rights and peace, and even received a nomination for the Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation Long Form. 1 month later, a familiar face in Marvel television would make his big screen debut thanks to recently praised film director Ang Lee. The Hulk arrived on the big screen in June, with a cast including Eric Bana playing Dr. Bruce Banner, Jennifer Connelly, Sam Elliott, and Nick Nolte. Like Spider-Man, the Hulk was another hero who had struggled to make it to the big screen for decades, and thanks to the technology catching up with the times, his time was now. The Hulk would be entirely digital, and CGI would make up most of the action sequences. Like Hulk himself, the film would receive a monster marketing campaign, including a commercial during the Super Bowl 37 time slot. The film would be the biggest opening weekend not to gross $150 million, and would barely make its budget back domestically. The film itself would receive a mixed bag of reviews. Some enjoyed it, while others despised it. But the film would go on to receive Saturn Awards for Jennifer Connelly and the film's score composed by Danny Elfman. With a new year approaching and a mix of gains and stumbles, Marvel ended 2003 on a positive note. They saw a success in their popular franchises and major potential from new projects as moviegoers were showing more and more interest in the comic book film. Science fiction and fantasy films as a whole were at the top of their game, and even Marvel saw themselves beating DC that year with a blockbuster flop in The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. 2004 would not only be a big year for Marvel, but a massive year for comic book film. This year would see an expansion of the comic book-based films hitting the box office. It began in April with Guillermo del Toro and Ron Perlman finally bringing the cult classic favorite Hellboy to the big screen. Marvel fans were itching for the big one to drop that summer in the anticipated Spider-Man sequel, but would see another of Marvel's cult favorites make his return in the new Marvel formula that was The Punisher. Starring Thomas Jane as The Punisher, the film would reintroduce the character. For many, it would be a first-time experience. Unfortunately, The Punisher wouldn't be able to hold on to the success of the other big names in Marvel, and this new Punisher would quickly slip through the cracks. Spider-Man 2 would hit theaters in June at the height of the new summer blockbuster season, and it would be triumphant. Like X2, Spider-Man 2 would be a solid follow-up with a deep story and a stellar cast returning with a fresh face in Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus, and top-notch special effects adding to some of the best and fluid action sequences on screen at the time. The success would be unlike anything Marvel had seen before, as Spider-Man would break its own predecessor's record opening day with $40 million. It broke the 4th of July box office record that was held by Independence Day for almost a decade, and received an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. The final quarter of 2004 would be an even bigger sign of the success of comic book films. Even Disney got into the superhero racket with the holiday release of The Incredibles. The year would conclude as David S. Goyer would don the director's chair and bring the final installment of Blade to the big screen in Blade Trinity. While the final installment was not received well, it did feature a fresh face in young and up-and-coming actor Ryan Reynolds. With his crude humor and snark, he stole the spotlight from Wesley Snipes, giving the fans a saving grace for a mediocre film at the end of Blade's big screen run. 2005 would welcome another huge year for comic books as early as January. Elektra would get her solo film with Jennifer Garner reprising the role. This would be the very first comic book film spin-off as opposed to direct sequel. The film would feature 2 more characters from the Daredevil comics, including Stick and Typhoid Mary. The film would only be a blip on the screen from moviegoers, as the reviews for the film gave Marvel its worst reception since their big screen debut with Howard the Duck. A mixture of a bland script and overacting from Jennifer Garner showed extremely poor box office numbers. The early portion of that year would feature Keanu Reeves as Alan Moore's famous chain-smoking demon hunter in Constantine, and a revolutionary film in Frank Miller's cult favorite Sin City. The film featured the story filmed entirely on a green screen with a slew of famous actors including Bruce Willis, Jessica Alba, Clive Owen, and a massive comeback for actor Mickey Rourke as the fan favorite Marv. It was also one of the first films to don 3 directors, which included Frank Miller himself. Marvel was poised for another big summer, as the next film was to feature a popular set of characters that fans had been asking for, but Marvel was about to see their success train get stalled, because something was about to happen that would shake up the comic book genre, and it would be the return of one of the most popular comic book characters of all time. He would be unlike anything the film world had seen before. Everyone knew it was a matter of time before The Dark Knight would return to the big screen. After becoming a laughingstock thanks to Joel Schumacher's blunder Batman and Robin, like The Dark Knight Returns, in the world of comic books, Batman was in need of a dark makeover. Up-and-coming director Christopher Nolan signed on for the rebirth of the Caped Crusader, and with films like Memento in his resume, fans felt that he was going to deliver. Batman Begins was dark, realistic, and very true to the comics. Pulling from various popular Batman stories and a stellar cast including Christian Bale, Michael Caine, and Morgan Freeman, Batman was back and DC was ready to rain on Marvel's hit parade. Even Tim Burton praised Nolan's work, saying that he captured the essence of the current comic book film, and the film received massive praise with many award nominations, as well as the Saturn Award for Best Fantasy Film, which was something that Marvel had not done amidst all of the company's success. With the success of Batman Begins, Marvel was dealt another blow when it was announced that Superman was about to have his own reboot, and that Bryan Singer would depart from the X-Men franchise to direct the film. If things couldn't get any worse, Marvel released their competition for Batman that summer, and it was the big screen debut of Marvel's favorite family of heroes, the Fantastic Four. The film would not be anything like Batman Begins, but a lighthearted, fun comic book adventure much like its source material. This was like comparing apples to oranges, and based on all the comic book-based films, Fantastic Four had the potential to crash and burn. Not to mention a second-class cast including Ian Grafald, Michael Chiklis, and the still pretty unknown young actor named Chris Evans. Despite harsh reviews from critics across the board, Fantastic Four was a miracle. The fans went to see Fantastic Four thanks to a stronger-than-expected opening weekend. The film would expand to additional screens across the country and, in the end, would see a worldwide gross of almost $350 million, with a little over half coming from the domestic box office. Even with negative reviews practically across the board, the fans had a different view, finding the film's lightheartedness fun and entertaining and a good time at the theaters. Fantastic Four was the light in the 2005 comic book film line's darkness, as the year would close with the Wachowski brothers' live-action adaptation of V for Vendetta, starring Hugo Weaving and Natalie Portman. Marvel dodged a major bullet, and now based on 5 years of comic book filmmaking, they saw themselves ahead of the rest with the latter half of the decade ahead. 2006 was going to make or break this company, as fans would be ready to see two of their favorite Marvel franchises return to the big screen. With DC ready to take them on in the coming year, it was almost certain that this battle would go to sudden death.